If you're not using React Query, what are you even doing with your life? If you haven't heard of it, you must be living under a rock. So let's change that. I'm gonna tell you about React Query and why you should use it. First things first, let's dive into the code. I'm gonna show you some examples and a background of why you would use React Query. So what would be the very naive approach to making a API request in React? So first we would get the data. Let's call it response equals, let's use Axios. It takes a method, in this case get, and a URL. And now it's going to complain that this is not a proper React component because it's a async component, like a promise. Also, if we would make this work, it would still be bad because this would fire on every render of React, and we only want to fire it once. And React, the solution to this is to use useEffect. This will still fire all the time. We need to give it an empty dependency array. Now it's still complaining about the async thing. The thing is, useEffect doesn't want you to use async callbacks because of race conditions. Here you can see the error for yourself. And also the response is not in the scope anymore. We need to use state for that. So let's create first some state. Give it any type. And then let's move this into a function. Let's call this function. And let's fix the still complaining. That's because I forgot to remove this here. And we see data. Isn't that amazing? This is the history. This is how I worked a lot in the past, where I had to write this boilerplate over and over again and prop drill down the data. But there's a much better, nicer way. And this much better, nicer way is called React Query, or in this case, useQuery, since we are querying data. Let's grab this piece here. This is the actual API call. We still need that one because useQuery decouples this. And let's replace this useEffect now with useQuery. Takes an option object with some fancy stuff. First, we have a query key. It's basically the ID of the request. And we give it a query function. This is the actual API call. And here we can use the access request. Let's make it async. So how do we get this data? useQuery returns an object that contains all sorts of really useful stuff. One of these is data. So we don't need to use state anymore. Amazing. And it's working. Isn't that great? Next to this, useQuery also provides us with the is loading and is error, stuff like this, and other nice to haves. This makes it really easy to deal with loading and with error handling and so on and so forth. And there's a really amazing thing about this because we can abstract this away. Now this is simply one single line of code, and it gets even better than this. Because what used to be is that you would have a other component. And in the past, you needed to pass the data that you wanted to use here. So you wanted to maybe say, you wanted maybe to print a title. And now we need to pass down the data here. And this is sort of prop drilling. And it can quickly get really messy because what if you have them more deeper nested, which is super common in reality. You need to then just have this tree of props that are being drilled down into various components, from smart components which fetch data, or parent components, or sort of containers that fetch data, that then have many children that do something with this data. And now I'm going to show you something really beautiful. So we can remove this. And we can just reuse the data here. Because this is one of the other amazing things that React Query does. It caches the results. So this is not actually firing many times. So if we had like 5 of these components, this wouldn't fire the event 5 times. Instead, it only is fired a single time, and then it is reused. The implication of this is that React Query is also a state management library. You have a global state that React Query caches the results of the data and reuses them every time you use the request with the same query key. This means the query key is sort of like an ID, and it's really important. So if you had like comments or something, you would have to provide something like an ID here that you would get from your iterator, maybe index, you know? Or you can have the composition that then creates the unique index. But what if you actually want to refetch the data? Maybe you're pressing some button that changes the state and now you need to refetch the data. You can do this with the query client, and let's say you have some button, you can invalidate a query. So now whenever we do this, as you see, it refetches the request. So to summarize this part, the regular way to do API request in Next or React is overly difficult. It involves a lot of boilerplate code. React Query doesn't only solve this problem and is super nice to use and is basically the industry standard for doing this, but it also provides the, next to the abstraction, the caching, making it a state management tool, and synchronizing and updating the server. You don't have to do prop drilling anymore. It's pretty amazing, but you really have to pay attention to your query keys. And finally, React Query doesn't only provide querying data, you can also change data with useMutate, which is basically a post request, and you can use hooks like useInfinitive Query, which gives you the ability to do pagination for infinitive scrolling, pagination, and so on and so forth. So it's for sure a super useful tool, and I encourage you to use it. I hope you found this video useful. This wraps it up. I hope you have a really nice day.